right, everybody, welcome back to another sharpening video. Today we are going to use the Work Sharp Precision Adjust Elite. So if you watched our last version where we did just the regular precision adjust, you may have noticed that it took quite a while to fix the edge on that Viper Scout knife. It was the edge was pretty beat up, and the regular precision adjust only has 3 grits. It's got a 320, a 600, and then a ceramic finishing plate. So for some knives that may not be enough. Basically, this knife here that Leo so graciously messed up for me, it was pretty beat up, and we are going to fix it. But the regular precision adjust may not quite be enough, because I just think that 320 grit isn't going to be aggressive enough to kind of get started with this. So specifically, the Precision Adjust Elite comes with 3 handles as opposed to 1 with the regular Precision Adjust. The base, I believe, has been slightly upgraded, as well as kind of this standing arm. The setup is pretty simple. You got your base, you got your stand that sits into it, and then you got your clamp for the knife. So one of the main things you want to be careful of with the Precision Adjust, whether it's this version or the Elite, is that you want to try to set it in about the center of the blade. And when you tighten it down, you want to make sure that your blade is centered as perfectly as you can get it on the actual clamp. So if it's crooked, that's going to affect your angle. And I think I had it a little bit off. So all right, that looks better. Okay, so once your knife is clamped into place, the clamp is just magnets that sit right in that little tool there. Okay, as a reminder, this tool has a little bit of play if you push too hard. So when you're sharpening, let your stones do the work and don't push too hard on your blade edge. We're going to start with the roughest. The roughest grit on this is 220. We're going to start there to try to work out some of the chips and some of the damage that this knife incurred from Leo's testing or wrath. And basically what we're going to try to do first is set the angle to 25 degrees. And that's what our grinders are set at. We're going to run a few passes and try to make sure that we've got the right angle. And you can tell that by the way it kind of eats into the edge of the knife. If it's only catching the very edge, you're probably too steep, or you got probably too wide of an angle. If you're not even touching the edge and you're more eating kind of where the paint is, it might be too small of an angle. So 25 degrees should be about right for this knife and most of our blades. So again, let the tool do the work, and you're just going to run this along the edge. There's multiple ways to do this. Work Sharp has some of their own videos. I prefer to try to do kind of a one swoop along the edge, like so. Always try to start at the beginning of the edge and try to end at the end of the edge. You don't want to roll over the end. So when you get to the tip, you're going to lift your tool off rather than just pushing all the way through. If you push all the way through, that's one good way to roll the tip off of your knife. And this one is a little bit messed up from what Leo was doing. So we're going to hopefully kind of reprofile that as we go. Whatever you do on one side of the knife, do on the other. Okay, so. Okay, so there's 10 passes. And what I'm trying to do right now is look and see that I've got the correct angle. And it looks like we're pretty much on. I'm not going to mess with it. It might be slightly up or down a little bit because we hand sharpen our knives, but this one actually looks like it's pretty well dialed in at 25. So we're going to go ahead and work this until we create a burr on the other side. So we're 10 passes in. That might take 20, 30. It might take 40 or 50 passes, maybe even more if you've got an edge that's really damaged. But we'll continue on, and then once we get to some of these rougher grits, we'll talk about kind of what we're doing. So, okay, so we have pretty much reprofiled this. The tip is mostly back. We've created a burr with the 220 grit, and now we're switching to the 320 grit. Typically, you don't want to skip grits. So if you started with 220, you don't want to skip the 320 and go to 400. You want to work the 320. Just because if you don't work up in that grip progression, you might leave some little tiny serrations on the blade. Basically, you might leave some scratches that are deeper because it's going to take longer to get through with some of the finer grits. But point is, we're there. I feel like we're moving right along. The chips seem to be gone. So we're going to run the 320, and then we'll move on from there. Same process from grit to grit. You don't really change just because you went from 220 to 320. Whatever you do on one side, do that on the other. You're trying to move that burr back and forth, and as we get to the finer grits, you're trying to work that burr off of the edge, and that's where you end up with a sharp blade. So we'll run this probably about 20, 25 passes per side, and then we'll continue switching grits. Okay, so I feel like we're pretty good on the 320. The burr seems to be moving back and forth. So we're going to switch this over again. We're going to move up to 400 grit. Now, the first couple of grits, that 220 and 320, they're pretty rough. So you may still feel like your edge may not really feel super smooth, but you shouldn't really feel big chunks missing. So if you do, then that means you probably still have some work to do with those rougher grits to try to get rid of any chips or rolls in your edge. Otherwise, if it feels at least fairly smooth after 320, you're probably good to move on to 400. Just know that as the grits get finer, you're taking off less and less material, and you're doing more and more polishing. So if you still have a chip at 400 and 600 grit, you're probably not ready to move on. You probably should back up and do the last grit a little bit longer to work out the rest of the chips. So just something to note. We'll move on, continue with the same thing with 400 grit. So I feel like we're getting there. The burr feels pretty even. I'm not really feeling much catch on my fingernail. So basically what I do as I go along through this is I'll try to feel for the burr, and I'll also run my fingernail down to try to feel for any really rough spots or any chips that are left. Especially once you get into the 400 grit and higher, you should really kind of be able to feel any blemishes on the edge that are left. I feel like we're in pretty decent shape. So we're going to switch from the first arm to the next one. Now this one has 600, 800, and a ceramic plate as the grits. So we're going to start with 600, and we're just going to keep on working. What I like to do at about 600 or 800 grit is I like to start with a few passes where I'm going to do maybe 20 or 25 passes on each side. And then usually what I'll do is I'll switch and start doing a few passes less on each side. And then as we get finer and finer with the grits, you get less and less of a burr on the edge, and it gets sharper and sharper as you go. But if you never stop doing a large number of passes per side, you don't ever really quite refine your edge. Your burr is always going to be on one side or the other. So the finer the grit, the smaller that burr, but it'll still be there. So about finished with the 600 grit here. One thing that I like to kind of do at the end of this is, like I said, do fewer passes per side. So we're just going to do 5 more passes per side. We're going to switch from 6 to 800 grit. Now, some people, they're not necessarily looking for like a super sharp, hair popping edge. They're just looking for something that's sharp and is going to last a long time for cutting. 600 grit may be where you stop and then you finish on the ceramic plate, or maybe finish it with a strop, or both. But since we've got the tool, we're going to go ahead and use all the different grits that are available to us. And we're going to go ahead and start with the 800 grit. By now, we're into grits that are pretty fine. And the rest of this should go pretty smoothly, pretty simply. And yeah, so 800 grit. All right, so we've gone through all the grits. Now we're on to the ceramic stone, which technically probably has 1,000 grit, but we are there. From here, we're now just polishing the edge. This is barely taking any material off, and it's really just polishing what's left on that edge, and it's going to take the burr off. We'll finish it with a strop, and then this should be sharp. The last piece of this is a strop. It comes preloaded with a compound to help polish the edge. That ceramic stone actually left it pretty nicely polished. The other thing it has is a little ceramic rod in it. You can actually use that to sharpen serrations on most knives. So a handy little extra feature. We're not using it obviously on this blade, but if we had a serrated knife, it would be actually pretty handy. The main thing to be careful of when using a strop is never run the strop towards the edge, always away from the edge. If you run it towards the edge, your main risk is cutting the strop rather than actually polishing your blade. So the strop should only be a few passes on each side. Really, we're just taking off all the leftover dirt and grime and just steel shavings that are left on the blade, and just trying to polish all of that out. This requires very little effort. You don't have to push hard at all. It just kind of slides across, cleans it off, but always moving the strop away from the edge. Okay, at this point we're sharp. Tested it a little bit on my arm hair there, but a little test just so that everybody can see. We are quite sharp with this bad boy. Okay, clean cuts. Like I said, I cut a little patch off of my arm hair right there. Overall, I think the Work Sharp Precision Adjust Elite is it's a great sharpening system, especially for those who maybe are a little bit newer to sharpening, maybe have a hard time finding the edge. This thing takes all the guesswork out of finding your edge. As long as you clamp it properly and don't push too hard, you're going to get an edge that is super consistent on both sides, which is important for having a really sharp edge on a knife. So thanks to Work Sharp for sending this over to us. The Precision Adjust Elite is a great option for a sharpener. The regular Precision Adjust is a good starter system. It'll get you in for about $70 retail. And the Elite Edition is, I believe, $140 retail. It comes with a carrying case, it comes with all this, and it comes with all of the different grip progressions. So if you're looking for a way to sharpen a knife, especially one that's maybe been beat up pretty badly, the Work Sharp Precision Adjust Elite, I would say, is a great option for that. Do what you're comfortable with. Work Sharp has a lot of other options, from powered sharpeners to little tiny handheld ones you can take on a long hike. So there it is. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.